Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into one of the most intense, visually striking, and honestly theologically dense narratives in the entire Hebrew Bible, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. As theology students, you've probably read it 100 times, but today we're looking at how the ancient authors took the brutal, volatile landscape of the Dead Sea and used it to paint an absolute masterpiece of moral warning. We're talking about environmental reality transforming into high theological art. Let's get into it.
Just listen to the sensory horror in this text. Abraham looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and he saw the smoke of the land going up like the smoke of a furnace. That's Genesis 19:28. It's stark, right? It's absolute. That imagery of a furnace billowing up from the plains isn't just some dramatic embellishment. It's a terrifying visual sign of total, irreversible desolation. And that visceral feeling is the foundation for everything we're looking at today.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, smoke like a furnace. Then, the geological canvas, the theology of reversal, Ezekiel and moral typology, the sin of inhospitality, and finally, warnings for modern cities.
Starting off with Section 1, Smoke like a Furnace, the Visceral Memory.
Think about the dramatic irony happening here. You remember back in Genesis 13, right? Lot looks out at the well-watered plain of the Jordan and chooses it because, honestly, it looks like the garden of the Lord. Seems like a brilliant, prosperous choice. But fast forward to Genesis 19, and that exact same choice drops him right into the heart of profound moral and physical danger, ending in sulfur and fire from the Lord. The whole rhetorical power of this chapter hinges entirely on that devastating contrast.
Moving to Section 2, the geological canvas, grounding the miraculous.
You see, this incredibly vivid imagery wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It is grounded into physical reality of the Valley of Siddim, down at the southern end of the Dead Sea. The ancient Israelites intimately knew this area, and it is a wildly volatile place. The water there is hypersaline. We're talking roughly 6 times saltier than the ocean. The valley is also full of these extensive bitumen and asphalt deposits, basically ancient slime pits. Fun fact, ancient civilizations actually used chunks of this Dead Sea asphalt to waterproof boats and even embalm mummies. Add a history of intense seismic instability, earthquakes that could easily ignite those volatile hydrocarbons, and massive salt mountains like Jebel Buzdum, which literally translates to the Mount of Sodom. So when the text says Lot's wife became a pillar of salt, that's not random. It directly links the human drama to the actual encrusted landscape of the region.
But here's where we need to pause and talk hermeneutics. We are not, and I repeat, not, just trying to reduce this text to a scientific report. We're not trying to explain away the miracle by saying, oh, it was just a geological anomaly. Instead, we're looking at how the biblical authors leverage their audience's shared cultural knowledge of this incredibly harsh, inhospitable terrain to craft powerful theological rhetoric. The bitumen, the salt, the earthquakes, they're the stage, but it's the author's theological imagination that turns that environment into a rhetorical furnace of divine judgment.
Section 3, the Theology of Reversal, the Grammar of Hubris. So what is the ultimate point of this furnace imagery? Well, it establishes what we call a theology of reversal, which is grounded in the grammar of height and hubris. This is a canonical pattern where human attempts to exalt themselves, whether it's the physical height of giants, the architectural height of the Tower of Babel, or the imperial arrogance of Babylon, are consistently met with divine scrutiny and ultimately a very steep descent. Sodom is the social and moral expression of this exact pattern. Its height isn't measured by towering buildings. It's an invisible moral arrogance built on pride, excess, and a chilling indifference to human suffering.
Which leads us to Section 4, Ezekiel and moral typology, the prophetic mirror. Later prophets didn't just look back at Sodom as some ancient natural disaster. They used it as a deeply flawed moral baseline. Look at this devastating diagnostic text from Ezekiel 16:49. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. Notice what's missing: fire, brimstone. Ezekiel shifts the spotlight entirely to social and moral failure. The original Hebrew words for pride and haughtiness used here link Sodom directly back to that grammar of hubris we just talked about. Their prosperity and apparent security literally offered them zero protection.
Section 5. The Sin of Inhospitality, Analyzing Structural Evil.
That text from Ezekiel points us right at the core issue, the sin of inhospitality as a form of structural evil. The narrative measures covenantal faithfulness by how a society treats the vulnerable and the stranger. When you juxtapose Lot with the rest of the city, the contrast is staggering. You have Lot at the city gate, offering individual, maybe a bit imperfect, but genuine protection to these strangers. And on the flip side, you have Sodom's systemic inhospitality. The entire male population, a unified collective entity, shows up demanding violent assault. This isn't just a few bad apples, it's a society that has become entirely morally deformed. The judgment falls on an institutionalized culture of exclusion that has totally rejected covenantal ethics.
Genesis tells us the outcry against Sodom was so loud it reached heaven. So God comes down to scrutinize these human structures of power. And the takeaway here is huge. Systemic social injustice is never, ever beyond divine reach. Having a booming economy or living in a lush, well-watered plain means absolutely nothing when a society turns its back on justice and the vulnerable.
Bringing us to our final section, number 6. Warnings for modern cities, the furnace today.
We have to ask, how does this ancient prophetic warning apply to the 21st century? The Bible's reuse of this motif essentially hands a mirror to every single generation, and honestly, the parallels to our contemporary world are right there. Extreme economic inequality, where you see massive material abundance sitting right next to systemic neglect of the poor. Institutional arrogance without accountability. Societies totally complacent because of a false sense of security, and, of course, outright hostility toward outsiders and the vulnerable. The Sodom narrative is loudly telling us that no amount of technological advancement or material wealth can protect a community that normalizes indifference. It's a profound, urgent warning for our cities and institutions today.
Which leaves us with one final provocative question to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. Where is the smoke rising from the plains of our own cities today? Where do we see this invisible height of abundance without justice? The ancient authors use the burning, volatile geology of the Dead Sea to make sure we never, ever forget what happens when human pride eclipses compassion. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep exploring these ancient texts with fresh eyes.